Hey everybody, welcome to Minding the Key Store, the YouTube channel that talks all things PKI. I'm Brian Roma, your shopkeeper, and welcome to 2022. And we've been on a bit of a break putting content here up on the channel. But I'm excited to be here and spend some time with all of you. And we're going to talk a little bit about using PowerShell commands and PSPKI to install certificate services for an online issuing certificate authority, an enterprise CA. But before we dive into that, those of you that are watching the stream, if you want to comment, you know, are you new to the channel? Have you watched our content before? Do we have some regular customers on there? I'd love to hear from you. Welcome to everybody. We have some exciting content that we're going to be coming out with. We're going to continue with the PSPKI series here in the month of January, and then we're going to get into some regular maintenance. So in my past travels, usually the beginning of the year, you start talking about you know, new projects, and then we often did annual maintenance cycles in the first quarter of the year. So we're going to talk about some common things that you might do in your certificate services maintenance in order to keep your PKI environment healthy. So let me know in the chat if you got any questions. Again, I've only got a couple of screens, so I'm going to be jumping back and forth between the chat window so I can see your comments or questions, and then my desktop share window. So stand by. If the comments queue up, don't worry, I'm not ignoring you. I will get back to you as soon as I can. All right, so I'm going to start sharing. Let me minimize the chat window so that my console is not what you see. All right. So in our last session, when we were talking about PSPKI, we used a bunch of PowerShell commands to install and lightly configure our offline root certificate authority, or as I like to call it, the ORCA. It just sounds, I don't know, it sounds like a monster movie kind of thing. Or a whale, if you're just a Marine fan, that's okay too. And so that server with those commands still exists and is running as a, let me go here, as a standalone offline root certificate authority. Now, this is in our AutoLab configuration. So in a traditional certificate authority build out, if you had a true offline root, it would be segmented off. It would be in a separate location. It wouldn't have network connectivity. In order to get into the environment with the offline root, there would be some sort of procedure with logging or key ceremony where you go in to access that particular device, because from a public key infrastructure perspective, the root certificate authority literally holds the keys to the kingdom. Its role is to be the trust anchor, and it is what authorizes everything else to participate in this public key infrastructure or certificate authority chain. So its role is really to define a handful of rules of the road, but to authorize the certificate authorities that are going to do the heavy lifting and publish certificates in our given environment. So we have our AutoLab build out ORCA. And let me take a step a little further back. So I've got an AutoLab build out that is, let me go over here. I've got an AutoLab build out that's similar to what you may have seen in our lab build series. And I staged a bunch of our AutoLab servers to have additional drives, because we recommend, PKI Solutions, we recommend having a different volume for putting things like your certificate revocation list, and if you've got certificates that you need to share out to your given enterprise, putting that on a different volume. So I made sure all of these were updated, and the AutoLab admin guide has commands on how to update the entire lab in one go. Again, keep in mind that AutoLab PowerShell modules do not include deploying Windows Server 2022, so that's not in my config file. So I manually updated the ORCA, and then I was doing some testing before going live for this ADCS Lab script test, and I ran through it with Server 2022. But once that was done, once I patched everything, I did a lab update on this particular from a command line in the configuration folder of AutoLab. And I'm going to follow up on our lab series and do some maintenance items in there so that you can see how can I do good care and feeding and be responsible with an AutoLab deployment after the fact. But I just wanted to let you know. So I patched everything. I added a D drive, and then I added a snapshot using AutoLab commands and called it pre-ICA before deploying an ICA. And then it made that snapshot on every single one of these servers globally. That's a part of that config file. So like the Lab 22 ORCA, it's its own thing. So I've got some different things that are in there. So yeah, if you're going to deploy something, you might want to put a snapshot in your AutoLab environment or whatever your virtualization solution is, and then come back to starting your build out. And as always, when we're talking about building out certificate server infrastructure, the content that we put here on Mining the Key Store is for demonstration purposes only. It's for education and awareness of how certificate services can be run and to step you towards that best practices path. This is not intended to be a production solution. Please don't take these steps and put them on a production server and deploy it to your company and put critical infrastructure on it, particularly if you don't have experience with public key infrastructure or Active Directory certificate services. You know, you need to engage somebody that has some experience and not only can tell you what you should install on a server, but why it needs to be put there, and maybe the how. Maybe there's a more elegant way to get things configured, built and configured for your given environment. So, you know, disclaimer, lab demo only. But here we are. Okay, so we've got an ADCS Lab Server 2022 that is a workgroup system in my AutoLab environment, and it's my offline root. And then I have a server called ICA. Let me jump over to that, if I can do it. Okay, so we have some commands that we're going to go through. Actually, let me jump back to the ORCA. So I built out the server, and we have the CRL, the Delta CRL, which is notated with a plus symbol, and then the certificate. Let me pull this over. This is a micro machine window with my desktop share. All right, there we go. So we've got our certificate revocation lists and then the security certificate for the offline root. I've got all three of these files. So we are going to copy these to the certificate authority where we're going to install certificate services. Now, keep in mind, this whole process of being able to just move files from your issuing certificate authority or a CRL distribution point or a file server or a load balancer, being able to just access and copy files and send files to your offline root, you should not be able to do that in a production environment. It needs to be walled off and isolated. But in this particular case, I've turned on guest services in Hyper-V, and I'm copying and pasting between both of those, and I put those files on there. So we've got a series of commands. So what we're going to do is, so again, this is taking advantage of the PSPKI. I've talked about that a bunch of times. You can watch some of our previous videos demoing it. I'll put a link to the tool set if you want to read more about it on pkisolutions.com. It's free to the public to use. We have a licensed version for corporate consumption. And we have support, of course, if you are in an environment and you're new and you would like somebody to walk through it. So we've got PSPKI that's on there. So what we're going to do is we're going to configure the CAPolicy.inf file, which is essentially a definition file for certificate services for a certificate authority that says, here's some rules of the road, the key length, the renewal period for the particular server, and then, you know, some other values that have to do with the CRL. There's some Delta stuff that's in there as well, which again, if you know, Delta may not be in the cards for you. There's a lot of environments that don't, they don't pass muster for needing a Delta CRL. So that might be something to pull out of your configuration. You should do some research or consult somebody who has experience in building and configuring certificate services if you're not sure what a Delta certificate revocation list is and whether you need it. And again, like we talked about with the offline root certificate authority, this one is a biggie. Load default templates equals 0. So if you're demoing this in an environment where you don't have a siloed off Active Directory forest, and you don't want the templates to push out to your domain controllers and stuff like that the minute that you turn on cert services, this is a great command to put in place, because once you get the role installed and you get it initialized, you're not going to make any changes to production. You'll have the role installed on your local system, and then you can kind of pick and choose what templates you decide to issue from on that particular certificate authority. So this is just a informational block that's here with those values, and then what we're going to do is we're going to create a couple of directories on the D drive for certificate services. The certificate services database is going to go in the CertDB file, and the logs are going to go in the CertLog file. That's pretty intuitive. And then this series of commands here set the CAPolicy.inf to the values that we were looking at before. Now we're going to add to the local store the 3 files that we put on the D drive. And then we have a command here, and this is going to be kind of, is this helpful? Let me do this. Yeah, that's probably better. I turned on word wrap. That'll help you a little bit. And so here we've got the certificate services install. And we are, the name of this server in the lab is ADCS Lab 19. It's CA Services 01. And it's going to go through the cert install. Now, things like the crypto provider, if you have something like a hardware security module, your providers might, well, for installing certificate services, it would be the same, but your crypto provider might be different depending on what use case you're issuing certificates from. Let's put it that way. In this particular case, RSA, Microsoft, key storage provider, and then we've got the path to the database directory and the logs. And then we're going to spit out what's called a rec or an REQ file. And this file we're going to put on the D drive. You can target it anywhere. You can name it anything that you like. You just need to know what it is. And this particular file, you're going to need to be able to transport to your offline root to process that request. Because in theory, again, that ORCA is going to be in some segmented environment. And then you can copy that file over with an encrypted drive or some encrypted process, maybe a workstation that has very stringent access rights. It can only get from the new certificate authority to the root, and it's a limited window, and you just need to mitigate your risks that are there. Okay, so let me jump back to me just a second. And let me jump to the chat window and see if anybody has any questions. We've got a couple of people that have taken a look, but we don't have any questions posted so far. Let me know. Let me know if you have any questions about getting certificate services installed. Let me jump back to the demo. Okay, so now that we've gone over that, I have... That's the ORCA. You need to see something, don't you? There we go. Alrighty. So I'm going to copy the commands over. Okay, and there's those commands that we were looking at. We're going to make the commands, the CAPolicy.inf. We're going to add to the store, and then we're going to install the feature. this run. It's like watching paint dry. And we actually expect an error. It's an expected error because CA services can't fully install when this is done. Let's see how we're doing here. It's still pending. Certificate services can't completely finish its installation until it gets an approved certificate back from the root certificate authority. So it's going to go through the process. It's going to get the role installed, but it's going to stop and say, hey, we need to configure. And here we go. I'll have to scroll back and forth, but it says this installation is incomplete. To complete the installation, use the request file, and it tells you where it is from the parent CA. So we're going to take this and process this on our ORCA. Then use the certification authority snap-in to install the certificate. And then this error ID is the same thing. So we're in good shape. This is actually a good thing. So don't panic if you're playing the home game. Okay. And as you can see, these are the files we manually copied over. There's our CertLog, our CertDB, and here's our ADCS Lab 19 CA01 rec file, the REQ. So let's copy that. That's not helpful. And let's go to the ORCA. Server 2022. Okay. We're going to, so here we are in the offline root. This is a standalone, and we're going to submit a new request. And I've done this before. I did this on a server 2022 issuing certificate authority. So we're going to do the ADCS Lab 19 CA01. If we go to pending requests, we can take a look. If we look at issued certificates, here's our sub CA. Oops. There's the issuer. If we look at the subject field, we're on the details tab of the certificate. I double clicked on it. It's ADCS Lab CA01 for the domain company.pri. Your domain and your host might be different. RSA value is 4096-bit. This is subordinate certificate authority. There's your SHA-384. So now what we're going to do is we're going to copy this to a file. We're going to call this ADCS Lab. But not an REQ file. Going to save it. So D, finish. We'll go back to the D drive. And there's our certificate. So now we're going to copy it and go back over to our issuing certificate authority. And again, if you're working in a secure environment, this could be this could be a lengthier process, to put it that way. I'm opening the certificate management console. Now, you don't need to start certificate services in order to get the certificate installed. We're going to install CA certificate. And we're going to choose X509. Am I in the wrong place? Yes. Okay, there's our ADCS Lab CA01. We can start CA services here. And the certificate authority has been installed. Now, there's a whole configuration process where we need to make sure the CDP, the AIA, the accrual distribution point, the authority information, I always get it wrong. The authority information access, thank you. The authority information access and the certificate revocation list distribution point are configured as well. But this is a basic walkthrough on how to get CA services installed to begin with. I will take the commands and put it in the show notes so that you can take a look at this. There's some additional values that you're going to want to make sure that your certificate authority has the right definitions so that it knows where to put the CRL. So in best practices environment, you would have a separate server, an IIS server with a share, that's being published via IIS that your certificate authority has the permissions to be able to send those files to. And so there's a process of making sure there's a DNS record set up in Active Directory to kind of sit in front of your web server or web servers. Or a load balancer if you've got a production environment that's in the mix and a DNS record that points at the load balancer. And then you need to configure IIS with the right permissions, and then you set up your CDP, or excuse me, your certificate authority to publish to that particular location. So I wanted to do just kind of a bite-sized chunk so that you could see the initial steps. So you need to make sure there's an evaluation process in seeing what should go into your CAPolicy.inf file. There is, and it's a similar process. In fact, let's take a look at this for just a minute. There's some differences, right? So if we go here, some of these values are the same, some of them are different. And one example here is the validity period of the certificate for the issuing certificate authority. And we generally set the validity period for an issuing certificate authority at approximately, half of that of the root certificate authority. So if you recall in our PSPKI episode where we did the ORCA configure, this was set to 20. For the ICA, we've set it to 10. What those values are that makes the most sense for your organization, might vary. More than 20 years, probably not a good idea. It depends. I mean, some places will do like 50 years if they're doing like manufacturing or something like that. But again, this goes to not just picking an arbitrary value and installing it, but making sure that you're aware of the implications of how long a certificate, once it's issued, might be in a given environment. Let me pull this over a little bit so you can see. How long a certificate might be valid and in an environment. So if you choose 100 years and you set the certificate revocation list to never expire, you could have something in play for production that never, in anyone's lifetime, the organization's lifetime, it never checks back to see if it's valid again. The process is evaluating what goes into your CAPolicy.inf. There should be an evaluation process about where you want to host your certificate database. And this is for those of you that are new to certificate services. I've had folks ask, what's the licensing behind database services for a CA? And it's a proprietary JET database that Microsoft manages and monitors, and it gets installed with the role. So this isn't a SQL, Microsoft SQL or OpenSQL, any of that kind of stuff. It's not a Oracle database for certificate services. It's a proprietary database that's installed with the role, but you need to determine where you're going to install it that your server has access to all the time. Preferably, we recommend a local location. Don't be putting this out on distributed file system or something like that. And then the other, piece is determining whether or not Delta curls are in play, and if you should have those. Obviously, you need to have those same decisions made on the ORCA first, because if these configurations you haven't determined exactly what you need to have on the root, and then you install on the issuing CA, you might need to reconfigure and or redeploy certificates depending on what it is that you're looking at. And then we've got the values for the CA itself. Now, web enrollment is listed here. You may or there's a conversation about where web enrollment should go. And we can talk about that because we're going to do a web enroll module later in the month that's specifically that. So in a non-lab environment, this would probably be peeled off on a different box altogether. So let me come back to me. We're almost done. We've been going for, I've been yammering for just a hot minute here. Wow, so we've been going 30 minutes already. That's crazy. So I haven't had anybody ask any specific questions about the configuration of the issuing certificate authority. But if you have any questions about how PSPKI can be used or the commands that are in play here, certainly post them in the chat. I'd love to hear what your plans are for 2022. If you have a topic for maintenance, if you have a recurring maintenance process that would be helpful to the entire community, not something specific to your one appliance, but if you're like, hey, we do this process on an annual basis and we would love to see a demo, I'd love to see a suggestion. Drop that in the comments. So I can't believe we burned. I just like to talk, as my coworkers and my family likes to affirm to me on a regular basis. Well, thank you so much for taking the time and watching through this demonstration. We're going to do more PSPKI demoing here in the month of January, and we're going to get into maintenance items in February. I'd love to hear from you, and we will talk very, very soon.